Kyodo News English World。
はい、皆さんこんにちは。こちらは共同通信英文記者のポッドキャストです。英文記者は国内外で起きている出来事について取材してオリジナルの英文記事を発信したり、日本語のニュースを英語に翻訳したりしています。共同通信の英語の記事をテーマにいろんな国から集まる仲間たちと英語と日本語を交えて、楽しくディスカッションしていけたらと思っています。私は山口祐希と申します。2021年に、海外部という英文記者の部署に移動してきました。それまでは日本語の部署で、記者をしていました。よろしくお願いいたします。今日は、特別ゲストとして、ワシントン、支局から、シエラさん、そして、経済部から、金友さんに、参加していただいております。アメリカの大統領選が終わったばかりですけれども、ワシントン支局で働いた、経験を持っていらっしゃる2人にいろいろちょっと今日はお伺い、していけたらと思っております。So Sierra, thank you for joining us.
Hi, yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Can you introduce yourself?
Okay, so hi, I'm Sierra Kugat. I'm the assistant White House correspondent at Kyodo News in DC.
はい、ありがとうございます。金友さん、今日はよろしくお願いいたします。
よろしくお願いします。
金友さんも少し自己紹介していただいてもよろしいですか？
Okay, my name is Kumi Kanetomo. I've been working for Kyodo News for about 12 years, and I moved to Washington D.C. in 2020, and then came back to Japan this April.
That's very recent.
Yeah, we miss her over here.
I miss you, Sarah.
今日は、シエラさんと金友さんにいろいろ聞いていきたいと思うんですけれども、ワシントン DC の、支局ってなかなかその日本の、でいる人にとってはなかなか馴染みがないところだと思うので、ちょっとそこら辺も踏まえてね、いろいろ聞いていきたいと思うんですけれども。So Sierra, like you work、as an assistant correspondent in Washington, D.C., our Washington bureau. Can you talk about maybe your daily work routine and what you do and what you cover?
Okay, so my daily routine, my whole schedule kind of revolves around Joe Biden at the moment. So it's kind of whatever he's getting up to. So some days it's a lot. Some days I get to go into the White House and cover a speech or two and then sit in on a briefing.And then other days it'll be a national security call in the office.
I see.
Yes,
so you actually get to go to the White House and be there.
Yes.
Like, I mean, like when you watch like American TV programs, there's a press briefing and then there's like a lot of reporters. So like you're one of them.
Yes.
Wow,
yes.
that's amazing.
Amazing.
I'm still in shock about it. It's really exciting to get to do it all the time.
I see.Kanetomo-san, like you work together with Sierra, right?
Yes.
What kind of topic did you work together on?
Honestly speaking, I have been working as an economic correspondent, so we didn't have a lot of work doing together, but sometimes we cover like a political issue, and she helped me a lot. We can't do it without her.Yeah, that goes to show like how important your work is, Sierra.
Thank you. No, we really miss you over here. I feel like we overlapped a lot on the two major pieces of economic legislation for Biden are the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act.And so I would get a lot of last-minute phone calls from the White House discussing how much money they were giving to different states to rebuild bridges or fix roads or try to boost the economy a little bit in those different regions.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a Bidenomics, right?
インフレ抑制法ですかね、日本ではね、日本の、ね、政策にも影響があることで、そういうトピックについて2人で一緒にやってらっしゃったということなんですね。I want to ask you like some personal questions, Sierra, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
You're American, right? I mean, I think it's kind of like, rare for an American person to like work at a Japanese media. Like, how does it feel like to be in a Japanese media working as an American person?
it's an incredible learning experience, I would say, just because I think Americans tend to only think of American politics from an American perspective. So especially being in DC and then being with a Japanese company, I feel like I'm always learning about how what we're doing is actually impacting other places.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know nothing about like how, we do recruiting in the United States. Like, did you know about like Kyodo News like beforehand, like before starting like job searching? Or how did you get to know Kyodo?
So I had a very vague awareness of Kyodo. Mm-hmm. And then when I graduated, I saw that they were looking for an assistant correspondent. And I just kind of threw my hat in the ring. I had just graduated, so I wasn't expecting anything huge to happen, but they apparently liked my interviews, so they picked me up. And the funny thing is, I didn't realize at the time that I was applying specifically for the White House correspondent. Mm-hmm. Oh. So I went through the application process. I really liked everybody in the office. They offered me the job. I was so excited fresh out of school and took it. And then they said, oh yeah, by the way, you'll be covering the president.
Wow.
So that was
amazing.
That's amazing. Like, I mean, that never happens like in Japan. Like, I mean, you start off, as a police reporter or something, and then, like go up the ladder. But, you like joined Kyodo and then became a political correspondent. I mean, that's great. I mean, I think it's a great opportunity. That way you get to learn like, a lot from, your fellow reporters and, reporters like from other media. And then I think that's very nice. Like, I mean, I think it's great.
Thank you. No, I've been incredibly lucky to have found this job. Mm-hmm. That's something I always like to say. Like, I got really lucky finding Kyodo.
でそういうわけでお二人にちょっといろいろワシントン DC のことについて聞いていったわけなんですけども、アメリカのなんか大統領選についてもちょっと聞いていきたいと思います。We want to move on to the next topic, which is the U.S. presidential election. So we already know the results. Trump won in a landslide. Sierra, so you cover the election like you're a White House correspondent. I want to ask you this, like why do you think Trump won? I mean, polls suggested that like it was going to be a very close race, but it turned out that Trump won by a wide margin. Why was that?
One of the things about polling both before and after the election is you typically get the people who have very strong opinions about either candidate. Mm-hmm. So you're mostly getting responses from people who either love or hate Harris or love or hate Trump. Mm. So leading up to the election, we thought it was going to be very close because that was a lot of the data we were getting. Mm-hmm. But looking at the exit polling, and again, it's a little bit unreliable compared to the actual vote count. But it seems that this election overall was more of a referendum on Biden mm-hmm. and the economy, mm-hmm. more so than I think there's this thought right now as the landslide is happening on both sides that it's this large embrace of Trumpism from middle America. And I don't think that's quite it. Mm-hmm. I think it's people are very displeased with inflation in the economy, and they saw this as an opportunity to vote against the incumbent.
I see. 事前の調査ではすごい接戦となってたわけですけども、蓋を開けてみたらトランプだったということで、そこでなんでトランプさんが勝ったかっていうと、やっぱりアメリカのインフレっていうのがやっぱすごいことになってるわけですよね。いろんなものが物価が高くなって一般の人たちがすごい経済的に困っていると。でそういうことで現状の政権をちょっと変えたいというような力が働いて、トランプさんが勝ったのではないかというような分析ですよね。
バイデン政権のインフレがすごく今回の大統領選の結果に結びついたというのが予想された結果ではありましたけど、この圧勝に驚きました。
そうですよね。確かに。で そこで、シエラさんが言ったように、メディアも、左寄りのメディアは、左からなんか意見を聞くことが多いですし、右寄りのメディアは右から聞くことが多いと思うんですけど、そういうところもなんかちょっと、事前調査とか、出口調査の影響に、影響を与えたのかもしれないですよね。Sarah, that's a very interesting point you made. So, people are displeased with this, inflation, and, people wanted to like change the current regime. So that's the reason, like you're saying.
I think it is part of it. And it's a point that the White House has brought up, but it's a point that people outside of the Biden-Harris administration have brought up as well, is that globally since the pandemic, we've seen a bunch of regime change, dramatic election swings like this. Where people, because the economy was so shaken up by the pandemic, that we've seen it in Germany, we've seen it in England or Britain, where it's just a drastic switch to the other side, and that experts are beginning to attribute that to like a somewhat disrest with the pandemic economy.
So, Sheila, what is your reaction personally to the result of the election as one of young Americans? Are you disappointed or surprised?
I am a little bit of both right now, I would say. I think part of it is I knew better than to get excited about the polling. But it made it seem that it would be very close, that there was less of a landslide coming our way. It was a little bit jarring, I think, just because I'm in DC, I went to school here, but I'm originally from Texas, and I don't want to discount the average American or all of middle America, but I would say the average American doesn't pay as much attention to politics as somebody in DC surrounded by other people in DC does. And so I think I really had it in my head that more people were paying attention to what both of the candidates were saying, and I thought it would be more than just a referendum on the economy.
You touched on the issue of inflation. How bad is it? Like, I mean, as a person like living in the United States, like, I mean, inflation is everywhere. Like, I mean, even in Japan, like, prices are rising. That's amazing. Like, considering like we had a, long period of deflation. But I guess like, it's more intense, in the United States. Like, do you feel it like when you go to grocery stores or, like buy something?
I would say I feel it a lot at the gas pump, which I know is what a lot of people were paying attention to was gas prices. I have noticed also that grocery prices have slowly been going up, which is not a blast. Yeah.
Right.
How about the price of housing, like rent of the apartments?
Yes, that is something my roommate and I were also dealing with, was that there was a much higher rent spike this year than I think anyone was expecting. Yeah.
If you look back on the past year, like you saw the election campaigns, like for both candidates, like Trump and Harris, what did you think of their like campaigns? Like, were there like anything interesting about them?
I thought it was interesting in the last few months how they've been trying to reach out to young voters and the very different approaches they took.
Tell us more.
It also definitely played out watching how the voting statistics, whereas Trump tended to go into what we call the manosphere of podcasts. So you have
Joe Rogan show.
Joe Rogan, and then a couple of other podcasts that also widely appeal to younger men who might not otherwise be exposed to politics. Whereas you had Harris and her campaign really leaning into TikTok. They really leaned in. They went to Call Her Daddy. She did SNL last weekend. And so there was this kind of, basically since Harris's campaign started, they both kind of dug their heels into the youth vote a little bit to see what they could get. it was interesting because there was, among young men, it was a broader turnout for Trump than you would usually get among a younger voting bloc. And then for Harris, young women were one of the only voting blocs where she remained consistent, if not better, than 2020. So I don't think that either of them trying to get the youth vote was in vain. I think they both, at least there, achieved somewhat what they wanted.
See. なるほどですね。トランプさんは若い人、どちらともその若い人に働きかけようとしたんですけども、トランプさんはその若い男性ですね。その力強いその男性のイメージっていうところを重視して、そういうようなそのイメージが、出せるようなポッドキャストに出たりとか、そういう戦略を取ってたと。で一方でハリスさんはSNS とかその TikTok などを活用してまた違った層に、働きかけていたということなんですね。
選挙運動のやり方が、その新しいやり方がどういうふうに結果に影響したかっていうのは、もっといろんな分析を聞いてみたいですね。すごく興味深いですよね。
これからね、いろいろまた分析結果とかがね出てくるのかもしれないですよね。I want to ask you just broadly. So there are a lot of issues that were talked about in the presidential race. There were issues of, the war in Ukraine, what's happening in the Middle East, and the issue of gender and inflation. Do you think those issues have impacted how voters chose their candidate?
I truly do think so. Particularly, my focus when watching voter statistics both before and during voting was on abortion or access to abortion and the war in Gaza. And so, if you couldn't tell, I had to focus on the youth vote a little bit. It was very personal to me. So especially in the primaries, with what we're seeing in Palestine, you saw a big activation of voters for the uncommitted movement. So they weren't, in the primaries, the only option for Democrats was Biden. And then instead of voting for Biden, they would vote uncommitted. And I think that likely played a role in him stepping down in mid-July. And so I know youth voters and some Americans were very proud of that movement to get him off of the ballot. I know there were some concerns that those voters then abstaining or doing third-party votes would then lose Harris votes in the main election. But then after we saw the landslide, it doesn't really seem that those third-party votes would have done that big of a difference. To that end, I don't know how many people abstained. So maybe that's a territory I will stay out of. And then also on abortion, like I said, Harris did a really good job of activating young female voters. And even though along most voter blocks, it was kind of a 45-55 split, it wasn't even 40-60. It was very close to 50-50 down the middle. She did still tend to have the upper hand with female voters, and then especially young female voters and women of color. So I think those issues were top of mind for a lot of her voters.
そうですね。Sierra, you are what you call Generation Z, or
yes.
a person from Generation Z, right? What's your friends' reaction regarding this election results?
So it is a little bit of a mixed bag because I am originally from Texas. But for myself and a lot of my friends in Texas and DC, I can't speak for the whole of Generation Z, but I know a lot of us are a little bit disheartened right now. But at least myself and the people that I surround myself with, we're trying to take this as a moment to take a deep breath, collect ourselves, check on each other. And just because the election was lost does not mean the causes were lost or the work is over for these different advocacy groups that you see in Gen Z. And so I know like the March for Our Lives group, the pro-choice voting bloc, like a lot of them, they see this as their work is just beginning. And so they're going to take a minute to dust themselves off. And it's kind of like Harris said in her concession speech yesterday. I think a lot of these voters are disappointed, but are not going to take this as their finish line. This isn't the end of the road for them.
I see. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining, Sierra. That was very insightful.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Yuki.
金友さんありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。
はい、共同通信では、共同ニュースプラスというサイトで、日本や世界で起きた出来事について英語のニュースを、発信しています。今日は、シアラさんと、金友さんに、参加していただいて、ワシントン支局の、仕事や働き方、またアメリカの大統領選の、分析について、お尋ねしました。大統領選の記事は、共同通信の英語のニュースサイト共同ニュースプラスでも掲載されておりますので、ぜひチェックしてみてください。それでは皆さん See you next time!